I'm Martin Bloom. Been asked to talk about how I come at the UK. In fact, I come at it from overseas because throughout my career, I've had the good fortune of getting involved in a whole range of different opportunities overseas. I'd like to just refer back to something you said, that the quantum world is uncertain. And I started my career as a planner.
Martin, could you keep the mic closer?
In those days, I thought that one could actually plan the future. If you had enough information, you could see which way you wanted to go. But then very early in my career, I realized you couldn't do that. So I actually took a deliberate approach to, if you like, move towards a portfolio career and not to plan where I was going. When things came along and I said I wanted to do that, it never happens. The universe pushed back and stopped it happening. So I used to wait till I was swept up by various things. And as a result of that, I went through various phases. The first one that's of note was I got involved with Japan and South Korea. Now at the time, Japan was an interesting country, but it wasn't anything special. But then a few years in, everybody started talking about the Toyota production system. And the Japanese electronics companies, the consumer electronics companies, were very dominant globally. In South Korea, I wrote a book for the OECD on the modernization of South Korea, on the Chaebol, where they got their technology from, how effective they've been. And then, as has happened throughout my life, every 5 to 15 years, I tend to reinvent myself. I get swept up in something completely different. And then I got involved with technology investing in the US. Well, initially the UK, but then I got sucked into the US. And that was a period when very few people were actually investing in hard technology. Even now, people prefer software, but in those days, there weren't very many people doing it. But actually, it was actually quite interesting, because suddenly I found myself in the middle of what became the first internet boom. And that actually gave me a very interesting perspective, which actually has relevance perhaps for one of the later panels, if you're looking at things like crypto, blockchain, NFTs, metaverse. There are a lot of sort of similarities in the sense of uncertainty of where the future is going to take us. And some of you are old enough to remember 2000, when the internet bubble burst. And at that time, there were quite a few people in the US who said, you see, the internet was just a flash in the pan. It was never going to work. And I've heard similar people talk about crypto and blockchain in the same way. But even if you were committed at that time, in 2000, looking forward, we're now 23 years on, almost nobody would have actually seen the path through which the internet sector moved. In 2000, IBM said the next big thing was speech, and that touch would never take off. But what actually happened was that touch was the basis of smartphones and tablets. And 23 years later, voice is almost ready to take off. So things do take decades sometimes. Now, the next big change for me was in 2001. I was actually taken into China by Lord Sainsbury when he was Science Innovation Minister in the Blair government. And I ended up as UK chairman of a joint working group between the two countries. But again, I didn't plan it. It just happened. And it just happened to be the beginning of the modernization of the world's most populous country. And I think even today, many people here in the UK probably don't realize just what happened in China, just how rapidly a country of 1.4 billion people changed everything from the ground up. And from that, I had another of my many changes. I became chairman of a Chinese solar company. And that took me into two areas where I had no background. I'd never been on the board of a public company. I've been on many private company boards. And I hadn't been involved in energy of any form, not the oil and gas industry, but certainly not renewables, which was quite at an early stage. But actually that taught me an enormous amount, which I actually brought back to my involvement in the UK. the company concerned, we took it public on the New York Stock Exchange, and in the first 5 years as a public company, we took our revenues from $5 million a year to $1.2 billion a year. Now, I thought that was quite good, but some of our Chinese investors were very unhappy. They felt we weren't growing fast enough. We should have done better. Well, there were companies that did grow more rapidly at that time. But it actually is relevant when I look at companies in Cambridge or Oxford or London. You know, quite often when they get a big contract win, they spend the next few months sitting around patting themselves on the back and saying how wonderful they are. In China, the next day, people say, that was yesterday. Who are you going to get today? Who are you going to get tomorrow? If you don't, someone else will. The world is very competitive. And the most successful companies are quite aggressive in their competition. The other thing it taught me, which I think is also relevant, is that we moved along the value chain. We started as a producer of scrap silicon from the semiconductor industry, taking it and repurposing it as solar wafers at a time when there was a shortage of polysilicon for a whole range of reasons. But we realized we only had a 2 or 3 year window because it was taking about 2 years for a polysilicon plant to be built and was costing a couple of $100 million. So we had that 2 or 3 years to capitalize on that. And we did this on an industrial scale, buying up large quantities of scrap silicon in North America, Europe, and Asia. But then we move, in fact, our first public listing was on the AIM market, and then 18 months later we listed on New York, where we raised another couple $100 million to build our own polysilicon plant and to also move into modules. But then over time, we actually found we couldn't actually make any money or found it was difficult to make money because it's very commoditized. There were a lot of people producing solar panels, so we actually then moved into projects because we found that if we put our own panels in the projects, we could actually sell the projects and make money. And then eventually we actually sold all our manufacturing assets and we just do projects. And then we restructured again. We actually, we started as a Chinese company and we were very global in our perspective, but we actually sort of de-emphasized China. We concentrated on Europe and North America. We actually, as a company, we bought back the shares of the founder, the Chinese founder, and we now actually, our headquarters are in Connecticut in the US. So the only reason I mention all this is that companies that I come across, especially early stage companies, especially when they have the structure of venture investors and others who have a very fixed view of what they want out of that company, usually stay at what they start doing in the first place. They don't move along. They don't try and take their technology. They don't take where they started from and move into other sectors. Now, one of the things I do now, I've also been involved, by the way, in the space technology sector. I'm now getting involved in medical implants. I'm chair of a medical implant company, putting implants in arteries to monitor the heart. And I'm trying to move the company to become a platform, a data platform, to start monitoring heart activity. I also see the opportunity of taking some of the skills in solar development, which is actually very akin to real estate development, and take it into social housing, which is another interesting area. But I think what is important is that I like deconstructing business models to make them more scalable. And I try and get entrepreneurs to understand this point so that they can actually get at the greatest potential out of the areas they're involved with. In addition, I use cognitive psychology to try and understand entrepreneur mindsets. Because what I found is that quite often people fail not because of the technology or the product, not because of the competition, but because of what they think they're trying to do, and a lot of the obstacles which they put in their minds, which are not in the real world. So that for some, they see these obstacles as like a mountain that they can't go through. And what I try and do is to get them to see it from a slightly different angle, where they can see there's a path which goes around the mountain to the next valley and the next mountain. So I think, if there's a message I try and bring to all of my activities, is to really explore everything around one's life, one's opportunities, to actually go global, and even when one comes back to the UK, as I have done, to try and bring this global perspective to it. And also to shift business models constantly, to look at new opportunities. So that is very much my background, that is what I've been doing. But I think there are some similarities to some of the things you were talking about in the quantum world, where these certainties don't exist. And maybe I'd like to ask, are there any quantum models of planning?
There is one classical that didn't work, was Soviet Central Planning Committee. I can tell you that it never worked because they were planning the future of, there was act of God, Soviet Union collapsed. In principle, yes, but your sorry. Yeah. Yeah, thank you. In principle, I think we can have a formula how to do that, but of course we have to understand that we're speaking about high probabilities rather than actual planning.
But is it true that in chaos theory, in chaotic systems, there is structure? There are strange attractors. So even in chaos, there is some sort of...
Yeah, but we have to find them. You have to understand, because when we think about the quantum society now, basically we don't understand it at all. What I'm telling that we have to take this seriously and go further into trying to understand the things that what we understand, which is immaterial elementary particles, how do they work? We do understand, but how human quantum objects behave is difficult to say. Yeah, definitely, the chaos is the most stable structure at the end of the day, that the one that you can get.
So I suppose I should pass across to you now.
Please don't ask me about quantum technologies. Thank you. I was just reflecting on my own background and actually something you said earlier about things becoming an entertainment business, be it politics or whatever. So I sit here as Chief Investment Officer of Innovate UK, so dealing with credit, investments and so on. My degree is in English and drama, so maybe I am uniquely qualified to become this sort of entertainment face of the UK, but never mind. It's about talent identification. So it's good to know. So for those who don't know, Innovate UK is the UK government's innovation agency. It's what we're here for. Our role is to foster the ecosystem. It's to try and make it work better. It's to convene people where necessary. It's to put funding in where necessary, or finance, or any other mechanism we might want to put in. And then it's to wrap support around that innovation activity. And for us particularly, it's about business-led innovation. We're about creating businesses that have the ability or the opportunity to then grow and scale through their technology and through their innovation. We sit within a wider ecosystem of UK research and innovation, which funds universities. It does fundamental research. There are councils across arts and humanities, particularly particular scientific sectors, and so on. And we sit as part of that ecosystem. And I guess that's really interesting what you were saying about identifying talent. I think that's partly what we're here for as Innovate UK. And we see, and I've seen as Chief Investment Officer since 2017, over 2,500 applications from businesses that think they've got great ideas. And we funded about 230 of those through our loans program. We funded another 150 or so through our investment activity. And we fund about 4,000 companies a year through our grant programs. So we are backing those individuals, we're backing those technologies and so on. And I guess that there's a message here for you who may be thinking about investing in UK entrepreneurs, scientists, people leading spin-outs, people with business-led innovation that's coming from places that aren't universities, is if they've managed to survive and thrive despite the system, think of the resilience they've built. Think of their ability to navigate complex systems, such as selling to the NHS. That's a complex system. If you've achieved that, it's definitely worth thinking that here is an individual we might want to back. And I'm sort of beginning to think around that idea of maybe what I'm doing is quantum investing. Because my role, Innovate UK's role, is about embracing uncertainty. We are in at the earliest stage of these businesses. We are seeing things that Maybe it's an idea. Maybe we're giving it a grant and hoping that idea gets somewhere. On my side, where we're doing investments, we're going pre-revenue, we're going pre-profit. Quite often, they haven't quite identified the market yet. So what we're embracing is the opportunity that they're presenting to us and the story that they're telling to us. And I like the idea that everyone could become a quantum investor and embrace that uncertainty. I think my pragmatic side says, yeah, to a degree. Yeah, you'll get investors maybe to reach down in terms of their risk appetite, but as Innovate UK, we're going to have to reach up and take the companies that are within our portfolio to the point where actually that is an investable proposition. And I think partly that is taking what we have learned about those companies. So we fund a project. Every quarter, a monitoring officer turns up. We monitor that project. We understand, is the cost under control? Are they making progress against the technology milestones they want to reach? Are they thinking about exploitation? But we do that every quarter, potentially for 5 years, for every company that we fund. For every company within my loans portfolio, we get quarterly financials and MI. What we don't do yet as Innovate UK is use that data to help inform the next part of their journey. So as investors, what can I do with my data? What can I do with my experience and the history of these companies to help you understand what the risk really is? Because if you don't quite understand the risk, the natural thing is to be a little bit more conservative in your application of your models. How can I help demystify these things for you? What's my role? Because I think what the UK has is a thriving science and technology ecosystem. It has some brilliant, driven entrepreneurs, but the journey for them is hugely complex. And Innovate UK has to simplify that journey in making sure that there are fixed reference points so that people, as they're navigating that journey, they may take a twisty route through it, but they know where the fixed points are they can come back to get support, to get funding, to get finance. That when they hit a barrier or a milestone, they can find a way back to then try again, go again, and then that support needs to be there. But to some extent, at the point they get to, we've got our first sale, we're doing some paper trials on the market. At the moment, we say, off you go. And there's a huge risk for us that the investors in this room, the investors in the UK, don't reach down and pick them up. And I think that's our challenge. I think it's a common challenge that you will see everywhere. That's why the valley of death between 2 and 10 million exists. It's because it's the demystification of that inflection point from, I've done my work, my technology works, I'm getting to market, and I'll get there. And just thinking about that sort of thing around skills and people. If I take an example, we've got a company in our portfolio called Catagen. They're from Belfast, which just proves that innovation can happen outside Oxford and Cambridge and London. So outside the Golden Triangle. I know Cambridge is excellent too. We've got a lot of good companies from Cambridge. Sheffield as well, Chris. Obviously a hotbed of innovation. They built a technology which we funded, which allows accelerated testing of catalytic converters. So they're sort of big engines, they run overnight, they pass hot gases through, and they can test the efficacy of those. And as they build more and more data, actually they'll be able to take that from actually running the engines, it's just running the data models, and then you can begin to strip out some of the over-engineered rare earth elements and so on within that. And that's great, that's a business. Martin also spoke about how do you then grow that and evolve that. Well, that same heat technology that they're using for that, turns out you can apply that to hydrogen production and hydrogen storage. And you can apply that to new forms of red diesel so that agricultural vehicles can run on a cleaner form of energy while we bridge the gap to actually have the technology ready to do the next bit. So there are individuals, and that was out of a Queen's University Belfast PhD, that turned somebody who was a PhD into a business leader who made that jump. Not everyone can, and actually recognizing when the ability to make that jump is part of the challenge a lot of the time. But there's a company that's understood, that's pivoted, that's looking for the next thing, that's got a sound business footing as well as the technology, and that's what we want to build as Innovate UK.
So, Scott, part of what you talk about could be anywhere, because this is sort of the life cycle of the entrepreneurial to a scaling company. What is the UK really good at, and what does it need to work on?
We're really good at starting. We're not so good at scaling and growing. And I think you see that all the time. And I think partly that's driven by the way that British entrepreneurs operate. So if they're going out for equity, they're saying, I need 500,000. and maybe next year I'll get 1 million, and then the year after maybe 3. And actually the big answer is, well, go for 5 or 10 now, because that's how you're going to scale and grow quickly. That mindset of being willing to accept a smaller part of a much bigger pie is challenging, I think, for British entrepreneurs. And the equity system in the UK, I think, feeds that a little bit. They're willing to drip feed in. And I think actually Innovate UK and the grant system feeds that by saying, keep doing your development, keep doing your research. Oh, do some more research and some more. And you end up with these beautifully shiny, polished things that nobody's ever sold. And I think that that's a particular challenge in the UK, and it's something that will require a change of mindset as much as anything as we begin to really take our businesses and ideas and make them huge and look overseas for those opportunities as well. I don't think we've quite, the Brexit question that came up earlier, I don't think we've quite embraced the opportunity that will exist. I think we're still trying to understand how we will then exploit that in terms of becoming globally facing and globally driven rather than just thinking about UK markets.
And Martin, your same question?
I agree with the comment about the over complexity of the development, especially engineering approach. That you try and get the most beautiful product you can possibly imagine, sometimes rather than just taking components off the shelf, and also designing it for manufacture. Because once you've got a prototype, you've then got to scale it up and try and make and drive the price down. And if you haven't designed it for that, then it's more and more difficult. But perhaps another problem is that we are a very open society, and the number of American and other foreign corporations that are sitting on the backs of these companies waiting to acquire them is such that actually, we can blame the companies for not being ambitious enough. But it's very easy when there's a large global corporation offering unlimited budget to take your idea globally. So it's not all the fault of the culture in Britain or the entrepreneurs. Some of it is, and I don't disagree, but there are a lot of sharks out there.
It's really interesting when we see companies that take that investment, but where actually the R&D activity and spend continues to be in the UK. So that's about the UK being a great place to actually do the R&D piece, and how do you do that? And that's why we fund infrastructure around catapults, for example, and so on. So, I mean, we've had companies that have been acquired and haven't even moved out of their office, and it's just continuing. The more of that we can do, the more reason we can give them to see that the UK is the place, whether it's regulatory reform, or whether it's infrastructure and so on, then the better that will be. But you're absolutely right. We don't want... There's not much point as an innovation agency in the UK pushing funding, public funding, into a company that says, thanks very much at the end of that, and then disappears off to the US or wherever it happens to be. Absolutely, you're right around that.
So, questions on the UK?
Yeah, well, I feel the pain that you described at first hand. And in terms of opportunity we talked about and bigger picture that we had all discussed on Friday, was it? This is exactly, I think, where I see massive opportunity for foreign investors to come in. I'll leave it there. Just think what I said. Thank you.
What, to create like growth stage funds to fill a gap?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And I guess my question...
Because she did fly from vacation, she may.
And I'm going back again. So the opportunity is because Innovate UK vet all of these businesses in early innovation. And it goes, we won, I mean, my business won, Innovate UK as well. I met, by the way, Scott only on Friday through Chris, but I won way back. So what I wanted to say is that it's a very rigorous process. You go through numerous assessors who don't know each other. They are from totally different backgrounds, and they want to see from their perspective, from their knowledge, whatever that is, if that business has legs and can actually succeed going forward or not. So having all these vetted process literally chewed for you to swallow, then it's so easy actually to put your money where the mouth is. So that's what I see as a great opportunity.
So success rate for Innovate UK typically is about 1 in 5.
Yep.
So we're rejecting a lot of applications at various stages of our process. So we are doing a lot of that filtering. I guess there's a question for the investors in the room, which is how can we build the yellow brick road that actually brings you here? It'd be reasonable for me to say, well, tell me what you want. At that point, I'll say, okay, well, that's what you want, but what do you actually need? And we'll have a conversation about it. But I think there is that opportunity to bring investors into the UK to work with these companies.
From where I stand, my name's Gavin Poolman. I'm a tech and content investor. I co-founded a mobile tech company that was founded by, I think, your predecessor. The Technology Strategy Board was incredibly helpful to us. But the problem here isn't so much seed capital, and the government's, I think, addresses that very well. I think it's growth capital. From where I sit, one of the major problems for that type of investment in Britain is there's tax structures, particularly the EIS, Enterprise Investment Scheme, which basically markets investments in currently mostly tech companies as a way of mitigating tax. And instead of the investors having to try and decide whether they're going to be investing in companies that might actually make them money because the opportunities that they're exploiting are interesting, or they have some kind of market share or strategy, they're basically just investing in structures created by intermediaries in order to mitigate their taxes. And for me, that's a huge mistake. It's the same problem with the content industry here, is investments in some of the most creative and important businesses in the world, really, are seen by most investors here as just a way of avoiding some tax. And I don't know what the answer is, but there's certainly no appetite from regular British investors or even institutions here to fund growth, which is why foreign groups are coming in, Americans and Europeans and Israelis too.
Any thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree with you. So there is absolutely fundamentally a 2 to 10 million gap for seed and Series A and A plus and B, C. We don't have interventions in that space. British Business Bank has its successor to Breakthrough. That sort of starts around about 10 million. I think there is a challenge for us in that gap between where we sort of run out of runway and where British Business Bank is beginning to pick things up. They also have their enterprise capital funds. They tend to be maybe 1-2 million sort of size. So I think there is fundamentally a gap in the system. Lifts, which was announced at the previous budget to try and leverage pension funds into this space. There's consultation at the moment. We'll see where that goes. British Business Bank, again, is the one picking that up and trying to design something and run with it. I don't think we've got an answer yet. I think it's a really challenging space. But I think it's going to be a combination of capital and leveraging the data and the expertise that we have alongside that to make sure it's a joined-up ecosystem. I think if you just design a fund which is there to do X, then they'll do exactly what they were planning to do anyway. Maybe a bit more of it, but that's the challenge. So it's about how do you make sure that the investments are going to the things where it really will accelerate or do something different, or it's additional to what the market was going to do anyway. And that will be the challenge. And I'd love to have an answer. That's one of the things I want to build into the next spending review bid that we're going to make as Innovate UK, something that begins to address that challenge. And whether that's regional, sector focus, or whatever it happens to be, we need something in that space. And it's got to be about scale and growth.
Who's thinking about this strategy? It seems that nobody in the government or think tank here is thinking. Give you an example. I'm dual citizen French UK. In France, we have BP.
Mm-hmm.
So the BP has identified, okay, climate tech is a mega important subject. Boom, 1 billion was pledged working to climate tech. The president realized, and it's the same issue here in the UK, we have no funding to agriculture technology or biology. So we need to have funds, same in Germany. So who is going to think about these gaps and put some public funding? Because I was an investor for 10 years. Most UK companies leave after Iran and they never want to come back.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is there is funding going into it. There's 6.2 billion going into those spaces across our domains, which include healthy living and agriculture, so picking up that agri-tech stuff. There's stuff going into digital technologies, stuff going into net zero. So there are big numbers. It's how that is deployed and where that is deployed. And I think Innovate UK typically is investing at the earliest stage. So it's investing its grants and so on. It's pushing money out and putting its support and wraparound support around earlier stage companies. BPI has the benefit of being both Innovate UK and British Business Bank put together. British Business Bank, we are working to come up with a joint approach to doing these things. So actually, it becomes less about come and compete for some grants, then go to BBB and compete for something else. But there is that idea of account management where you actually pick up these companies, you're taking them through early stage, you're continuing to work with them to hold their hand, and then there's transitions and handoffs. It's about making the system work better overall, and actually the handoffs. I think there is capital there. BBB has quite a big balance sheet. If it wanted to directly leverage into that space, it can. And I was at a round table with George Freeman the other day on agritech. And the big challenge is that we've got lots of agritech companies that we've got to the point where they're ready for Series A and they're ready for growth. And they're looking around and they're seeing 2-3 investors in the UK who are active in that space. Maybe Yield Lab, maybe Presidium, a few others in that space, but not huge numbers. And the generalist investors don't understand the market. So it's about education, connection, helping to build those things, because I think the capital is there.
Scott, we have a few more questions, just real quick.
Can I just add to that? Because what you're seeing in the UK is successful entrepreneurs are beginning to recycle their money, and they're getting involved. People like the Founders Factory, they go in a very early stage, but they're doing it on a venture studio model. They're actually trying to build businesses. But that is having an impact in certain sectors.
Yeah, thanks. Can I just challenge that British entrepreneurs are not as ambitious as the US ones? As an entrepreneur and then turned VC myself, I've sort of seen both sides of the table. I think that actually investors have a lot to do with that, to be perfectly honest. If you look at an entrepreneur, mostly first-time entrepreneurs, their entire life is in that particular company. And because the investors are not allowing this entrepreneur, even at Series B, to take secondary, for example, from the next investment that's coming along, essentially they have all their eggs in shares in this particular company. So when an acquisition comes in, then they take it, because that's a life-changing event for them. But if the investors are much more open-minded to allow the entrepreneur to take some money off the table, there will be far more risk takers than, let's say, otherwise. So that's only happened in my business, in the first business I had. And the other thing I want to say, I think, and maybe Innovate UK is in a position to do something about this, is that I think university spin-outs are broken. And the reason I know that is because I helped one company as chairwoman to spin out from my own old university, Southampton, who's been very successful right now, but the university took 30% of that company. Absolutely travesty. And I think that's something that perhaps Innovate UK can actually influence to really get British universities to wake up to the fact that it's just not commercially viable. Anyway, 2 points.
I certainly didn't mean to say that British entrepreneurs weren't sufficiently risk-taking. I'm a non-exec on a company myself, and I've had those conversations with the founders there, where it's, well, what should we take? Are we taking enough to get us through the next 6 months, or are we actually thinking, go for it and go scale? So it's only my personal experience of that, and having seen 2,500 financial forecasts over the last, maybe part of the challenge there is businesses trying to tell Innovate UK what it thinks Innovate UK wants to know. Well, what Innovate wants to know is the plan that they're holding themselves to, not the one that they've structured to try and make it look attractive to a government body. So maybe it's partly about how we communicate and so on. So I get that. In terms of university spin-outs, I guess I have to say this as myself rather than as a representative of UK research and innovation. I have certainly had a conversation where investors have said to me, universities don't have a single common approach to tech transfer and ownership and so on. So as a VC, do I really want to go and negotiate with every different university? Or actually a template approach that would be really powerful. So absolutely agree with you. We have a portfolio company that's hit some challenges. It needs to go out and raise, or it will fall over. The university they've worked with have 67% of the ownership. So at the point they're going to market, they haven't got a chance. So absolutely, I recognize that from the reality of the situation in some of the companies that are in my portfolio. Yeah, absolutely. There needs to be a common approach.
So we have Roshni from the UK government, but she's from.
Sorry, Roshni.
I'm going to bring her on just because we have a perspective to share.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Roshni. I work for UK government, so I'm at the Department for Business and Trade. I'm a senior investment manager there, covering science and innovation real estate primarily. So my gambit is really trying to encourage overseas investment into places in the UK, science and innovation sites like Sheffield, where we've got some amazing opportunities coming up for really big injections of capital investment. So that's what I focus on at the moment. Previously, I've worked across science and innovation policy roles within UK government, primarily at what was BEIS, but is now the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology. So I worked very closely with Scott and colleagues at Innovate UK there.
I'm going to give you a magic wand. You're in charge. What should the UK do?
So I think it's a very fair comment that we don't have as much funding at play in science and innovation as other countries do. I mean, the US is the primary comparison with the Inflation Reduction Act and the huge amount of money that we're seeing going towards technologies through that. But having said that, we are putting a lot of money into UKRI and Innovate UK to fund these kinds of technologies, and we have seen massive increases in the amount of funding that we're putting towards that. So as a small country, there's only so much we can do, and we need to keep that momentum, but also leverage the private markets as much as we can. You mentioned university spin-outs. There is a review into exactly that point going on at the moment, so there's an independent review because we've heard so many times that universities are taking too large a stake in their spin-outs. So something pending on that, keep an eye out. The Prime Minister has announced his 5 technologies of tomorrow, which it's none of it's going to be anything new to you guys. It's artificial intelligence, quantum, engineering, biology, semiconductors and telecoms. You're probably hearing that and thinking, okay, that sounds incredibly broad, and it is. But that's the way the government needs to work, because we need to set direction in these large areas. And then we need the private market to come forward and tell us where there should be focus within that. And the best way of doing that is essentially to allocate money towards those things and show us where you think that those bets should be. Do come and find me at the Tea Point if you have any further questions or you want to chat about anything.
Come join our 361 firm community of investors and thought leaders. We have a lot of events created by the community as we collaborate on investments and philanthropic interests. Join us.